Welcome to Miles to Zen. I am your host, Shannon Miles Halliday. And in this podcast, we explore personal growth, mindfulness, the opening of perspectives, and transformation. And today, I am delighted to introduce our special guest, Elyse Cathrea. Elyse is a certified wellness coach, a somatic embodiment practitioner, which we'll get into what that means, an intuitive reader, a yoga and meditation instructor, and she also has a show on YouTube one time per week with two others called Spirit Coffee Talk with Avalon Spirit. So Elyse supports her clients in moving from a state of chronic stress, feeling overwhelmed and disconnected both from themselves and their lives, towards healing, regulating, and finding alignment, and ultimately coming back home to who they truly are and what they truly desire. We will be talking to Elyse today on how she helped me prepare for my scariest podcast interview yet with Dr. Evan Alexander. I was really getting in my head about this session, so stay tuned. Let's jump in. Welcome, Elyse.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
So what I wanted to talk with you about today, and of course, please feel free to add anything, is I'm really interested in how you started doing this collection of work that you're doing. Really dive into that, dive into what is somatic embodiment. And I would love to share about the session that we had because it was so impactful for me prior to my biggest interview that I've had yet. And it really made a difference for me.
Yeah. Happy to. So it's been a journey, and I get a little eye roll with that term because it's just used so much now. But
Well,
it's
Miles
really
to Zen, it's all about the journey.
it is, yeah. And it's just been such an unfolding. I started I joke, like my first big girl job. I got into the corporate world and I got into human resources because I was going to help people. And I think you can find that in human resources, but it just over time, I kept thinking like, okay, once I get to this next level, then I'll feel good and I'll feel like I fit here and I'll be happy with this. And then I'd get to that next level and I'd be like, I don't know. And so it evolved. And, I'm really grateful for that time. I spent, I think, 12 years in HR and evolved into doing like leadership development and coaching and organizational development and teaching courses and doing things that I would have never, ever, ever thought I was capable of doing or would be good at doing or enjoyed. So it really gave me like a great skill set that I was able to kind of jump with after the fact. But the like persistent, this doesn't feel like the thing. I hit kind of a point of burnout. I started having health challenges. I was really burnt out. I was having a lot of like anxiety and stress. And, all along this way, kind of going down my intuitive journey as well alongside it, and just feeling like these two parts of me were existing so separately in my
Right.
life. And it felt very disorienting and like I was kind of living these two lives. Um, and so I decided to resign from human resources. I, started working a part-time job. And not long after that, my dad passed away. And, I've spoken a lot about him and his journey, and he had really some pretty intense challenges with his mental health and things like that. And, intuitively, there was a lot of pieces with that I knew were coming. And so there was an intuitive understanding of like, okay, when it happened, I'm like, oh, okay, I've seen the signs of this. I just hadn't put together the how and when. Um, but it also took a massive toll on my body and these chronic health issues that were kind of like stirring for a while after my dad passed away exploded. And so I was really having a hard time with the grief. I felt like people didn't really talk about grief in a real way. So it was very disorienting being in the grief experience and not really and being like, is this what it's like? Like what is happening? Feeling like it was living in my body as much as it was living in my brain, if I could say that.
Right.
It's that sensation of like, I was new to this job that I was doing, and, I could feel the emotion rising up in my throat, and I didn't know anybody. I didn't feel safe to cry. So I just kind of swallow it down. And then it would get stuck there. And, I was also dealing with chronic pain. I was diagnosed with endometriosis. And so I had all this pain in my body and this emotion in my body. And the only way I could really like access it and move it was through movement. And at that point, I was a yoga teacher, but I wasn't doing yoga. I was just kind of closing the door to my office, shutting the blinds, getting down on the floor, and just like moving my body in an intuitive way. And then this emotion would come up. I would sob, I would cry, and then I'd be like, "Oh, okay, okay." And so, and then I could move through my day. And, I also did, trauma work and somatic therapy and different ways to support the emotional component of my grief. But then I was working with my body and pain and my health and all this grief and trauma in such a different way. And now realizing that that was leading me to this world of somatic work that I do now. I was in a coaching certification, kind of the wellness coaching, and that was great and fine. And gave me the foundation for the things that I had already learned in my previous career. But I was like, there's more to this. There's the way in which we connect with these experiences in our bodies. There's something there. And somatic work was happening, but it wasn't kind of what's the word I want to use? Like the fancy word, common term, I guess, that's being thrown around right now. It's
It is a
catchy.
fancy word.
Yeah, it's not bad. I'm trying to think of the word, but I can't think of it. But you were hearing about it a lot, right? And it wasn't so much back then. There was pieces of it, but it was a lot quieter. And so really that was the door to moving more into connecting with my body in a deeper way through chronic health issues, through my spirit, and really kind of realizing that I needed to take this approach for myself, but also, in the work that I was going to do around merging the mind, body, and spirit, because it felt like in the world they were treated very separate.
Yeah.
But in my experience, they were very interconnected because I had, this deep experience that was happening in my body, but I was also experiencing so many things in my mind mentally.
Yeah.
And then my spirit and my intuition was also kind of playing this role. And when I started to work with them in a way that kind of merged them together, realizing that they're not separate and they all have the same things present, like they all kind of are the same thing in many ways.
Right.
A lot of things started to shift. So that's kind of how I went into this world, and then, took all the trainings and did all the things, and here we are.
Yeah, that's so great. And I forgot to say in your intro that I first was introduced to you through a regular podcast that you do with Avalon Spirit, and that you're one of the mediums with Avalon Spirit. And what just delighted me about you is not only that you are a Libra, but the way you approach so many things was so relatable. And I just could really I loved the way that you talked about the body. It's just an approach that I think is so great. And well, the three of you together are amazing. Even if there's just two of you that show up, you're still amazing. It's one of my favorite podcasts to listen to. And so I really liked what you were bringing into those conversations. And I thought, oh, that would be great to have Elyse on the podcast, but also do some of this work and get an exploration of, okay, how is it that you can bring that to the table? What's cooking in the background? And, life, as we said at the beginning, life's so much of a journey, and we pick up things as we go. And then we get to pollinate everything else with those great ideas and those tough experiences that we've gone through.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for saying that. I love doing Spirit Coffee Talk. It's one of my favorite things. And I love that the three of us we're all so similar, and yet we bring different views and experiences. And it kind of just like merges together into this really lovely triad of conversation. So yeah, I really love Spirit Coffee Talk. So check it out. We're just on YouTube, so you can find us. But one of the pieces for me too, from a spiritual lens, is I struggled a little bit with, and I think that's why I take the approach that I do. Like I can talk to all the crazy beings and do all the things, and that's fine. But for me, early in my journey, and even still, it felt like there was a lot of blame in the spiritual world. It felt like there was a lot of bypassing of people's realities. Just think positive thoughts, just do this. And it's not to, poop on anybody who says those things, because I don't think it's wrong. But where I love the merging in of somatics is that, for people who are, we're trying to manifest, or we're trying to create this different experience in our life. There's often this like point that we bump up against, and it's, okay, well, just change your thoughts around it. And people will often say, like, well, I can't. Like, I keep trying, I keep trying, I keep trying, and maybe I can do it for a little bit, and then eventually I'll revert back to old ways of being. And for me, that's where the somatics piece comes in, because it's these pieces of life experiences, of big T trauma, little T trauma, different collections of life hardships, or, wins and amazing things that run kind of in the background of our body and in our nervous system that are driving that bus. And so there was often, I would see a lot of like shaming and blaming around, like, well, if you're not living the life you want, that's your fault. And it's like, I get a little spicy about that, because I'm like, first of all, the blame, and I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about your experience, but like the blame, shame of these things that live within us that are the blocks to our successes or the things that we want, shaming and blaming them doesn't help them. It doesn't heal them. And they're often rooted in younger experiences in our life, and pieces of us that need love and need support and need nurturance. And like shaking our finger at them and being like, you're bad, don't do that, you need to go away so I can be successful, is just not, it's not going to be the way. It might work for a bit, but usually it'll pop up again in some way, shape, or form. And when we start to work with sensations in the body, with experiences in the body, and things that come up through somatic work, we can start to get to, in a really gentle way, in a non-blamey way, to the heart of what might be there that's blocking us, and how we can support it, what it needs from us. That can look like a million different things. And then it starts to shift. And then we notice that as we're trying to move towards that thing again, that we've been, maybe hitting this block around, it starts to become easier. And, I'm really passionate about, I don't really believe in self-sabotage, because I think if we find ourselves self-sabotaging, it's aspects of ourselves that are trying to keep us safe from something that we don't feel as safe, that we don't understand, that we've never experienced before. It's kind of devil you know versus devil you don't. And what if it doesn't happen, or what if it doesn't work, or, there's so many things, but it's often it's a self-preservation. And the term self-sabotage to me feels very like you're just trying to make yourself suffer, but it's actually, you're just trying to like help yourself be safe. That it might not logically make sense, but that's what's happening internally. And so in this whole kind of spiritual world, that's for me why I take this approach, and, where I've come to in my own journey as well, of like, stop fighting our bodies, stop fighting our intuition, stop fighting our minds, and work with them in a more gentle, supportive way, so that we can, if we want to move blocks out of the way so we can move toward things, great, let's do that. But shame and blame and, the kind of, you're not doing it right energy mentality is just not going to be the thing.
Well, and it's probably the key thing that sends everybody into counseling eventually at some point, is the shame they felt as children.
For sure.
And it's the biggest tool our society has to kind of keep us in check, or keep us in certain groups, or keep us from, it's a society fear tool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And it comes from like the most benign places, the things that we would have never, certainly it can come from these big experiences, but it can also come from like the passing comment from a teacher.
Right.
That, like for the longest time, I thought I was not smart because I did terrible in math. And my teacher in high school told me regularly, you're like, and he wasn't wrong. I was not good at math.
I could so relate. I had this wicked grade 8 math teacher, and I was in late French immersion, and he would have me at the front of the class yelling his head off at me in French in math. And why they did that for late French immersion, had math in French, I'll never know.
Oh, Lord.
And he would just yell at me and another of the students until the first person cried. Mm-hmm. My math has still been a struggle in my life, but I've had moments of overcoming it. But
I
that
feel like
guy, yeah,
let's lean into our strengths.
yeah,
And it's funny because you know, we can do this work and we can work with like the experiences that live with our in our body and support our nervous system and do all these things. And like I do this as work and I, you know, practice it regularly for myself and I have my own somatic practitioner. And like my partner and I, he'll want to play crib and like simple math, not that hard. And I can do it, but like the nervous system response that I
right,
have when he's like,
right,
wanna play, and I'm like, he's not gonna judge me. Like he knows
yeah.
my like we're not good at math. They told me I wasn't gonna have a calculator, and now I have my phone and a calculator, so I won. And so joke's on you guys. But like I'm never. It's not gonna be my skill set. It's just not. I've leaned into that. I'm okay with it. I kind of own it and make it like a funny thing because it's like, whatever. If we were to ever have kids, I'm not gonna be the one teaching them math. That's for sure. John's great at math. But even with that, you know, making light of it, knowing where it comes from, knowing that I'm smart, knowing all of
Yeah.
these things that are, you know, the opposite of what that belief was, my nervous system still responds when I'm like, oh my gosh, I have to like do math in front of somebody because of the
Right?
shame
Yeah.
of like doing times tables and being the one that like I was trying to calculate it ahead of time. So when he got to me, I wouldn't be embarrassed in front of the entire class because I couldn't do it on the fly.
Which is probably a lot more work than anyone else was going through because you had to figure out what the question was going to be when they finally got to you.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know, let's talk about, okay, can I hold space for people? Do I have all these other skill sets? Yes, but that was never highlighted to me. It was, you're not good at this area of school. And I carried that with me for a long time. I made career choices based on that because I was like, oh, there's too
Yeah,
much math in that. You know, like I can't be a nurse or I can't do this because I'm going to have to do chemistry and math. Like, no, it's not going to happen. But,
right.
you know, and so on one hand, we can kind of, from a spiritual perspective, say, okay, things happen for a reason. And, you know, I went into HR and learned all these different skill sets and public speaking and all these things that I used to be terrified of, largely from those experiences. You know, I was
Yeah.
able to really actually tap into my, you know, abilities and what I'm good at, but I'm not, it still lives in me, right? And it's something that we have to just work with. And I think that's the heart of somatic work, is relearning that our bodies are able to work with the things that are scary, that are hard,
Yeah.
that, you know, we've been taught to turn away from. We've been taught to turn away from the wisdom that lives in our body and in our nervous system. You know, you have to finish your plate. Don't cry. You're fine. You're fine. You're fine. If you fall and something hurts, or, you know, this language that we've all co-opted. It's no, you know, it's not our parents' faults. It's not because we're taught the same thing. And this has been something that's been moving through, especially the Western society, for a long period of time. So really all this is a relearning of what the body signals are and how I can listen to them and creating trust in them.
Yeah, that's key. And even as a parent, you know, this comes up a lot just in raising your kids and seeing, you know, when they do that, like the soccer injury that feels like, you know, the TV soccer injuries where they're lying and they're like writhing in pain and you're like, that guy's down for good. And then he gets back up and he's totally fine. And you're like, what was that?
Mm.
And the oh, you've really got something going on. I need to listen to you. So it happened to me the other day. Is I was watching my son play a sport and he got an injury and it was a little one and it was sort of he felt dramatic about it. And part of me was okay, like trade expectation for appreciation. You know, this is his journey. This is, you know, he's feeling what he feels. And the mom, that's the product of her youth, that's like, get your ass back there on the court. The coach has you out there. You're fine. And we, you know, he's going to have his own set of things to go for counseling about as he gets older. And we're all doing the best that we can. And it is so funny to see that on both levels, on the level that I've internalized, and then seeing it when I'm potentially doing something that's going to require my child to go for counseling in the future. Probably, add it to the list of the things.
Yeah. We're all imperfect and we're all screwing each other up to a degree and we're all helping each other, everybody grow, right?
Right.
And yeah, and I think it's so interesting when we can kind of step back and take the again, it's the shame. We don't need to shame ourselves over doing something that was taught to us. It's just, okay, I'm now realizing how that feels in my body when I did
Mm-hmm.
that and when I was told that. And I'm relearning to do things in a different way with, the people in my life. And that applies to everybody, right? Whether you have children, whether you
Right.
have a spouse or friends or, any of that. For the longest time, I was the friend who, I always found myself in a space holder position, but I was often the friend that was like, okay, how am I going to fix it for you? Like, what do you need? Let's brainstorm solutions. And now when people just push solutions on me without giving me the space to just feel my feels because I've learned that skill again, it feels very uncomfortable. I'm like, let me just do my process. And then when I'm at this place, then we can problem solve. And I'm
Yeah.
super appreciative of that. So now I've had to relearn, okay, you know how that feels when someone says I'm really sad and I'm feeling all these things. And we're like, great. Okay. What are we doing about it? Right.
Yeah.
That might not be what they need. Or maybe it is. I now ask, do you want space holding or do you want problem solving? Because I'll offer both. And some people
Right.
want to jump right in and some people would just rather no, I just needed to be heard.
Yeah. Oh, this is so brilliant to just take that minute. And all relationships can benefit from remembering to do that. It's almost making me think I should wear an elastic band on my wrist or something just to remind myself
Well,
when
I feel
I'm
like it's
going into that mode.
yeah, I think I that's the really cool thing about somatics and it's kind of where it transitions interestingly into intuition as well, is because you're already doing that, right? You already checked yourself in this interaction with your son, being like, wait a sec, how do I want to, reassess my response to this with him? Um, and I think that leads into intuition in the sense of we're all very intuitive beings, whether, we practice or mediums or not, right? We all have intuition. And when we're super disconnected from our bodies, we're super disconnected from our intuition. So now for me, I tend to, if I don't know and can't really read what somebody needs from me, I'll ask the question. But now, because I have a certain level of baseline with people in my life and a specific, an intuitive connection with them, I can usually kind of sense I don't ask every time. If I'm unsure, I will. But I'll just kind of follow my intuition with it. And sometimes, then if I'm in a place where maybe I'm a little less connected to my body and my intuition, then I might misstep. And then, we can catch the signs of oh, they responded in a weird way. I know what that feels like. And I'm reminded of that. And that's the really interesting thing about somatic work is once you kind of open the door, you can't unknow the things and you can't unfeel the things unless you really take a long time to ignore them. But if it's something that you're actively practicing is this reconnection to your body and the wisdom that's there and the intuition that's there, it becomes quite loud and you start to realize oh, this food can't do. Oh, this type of, environment or energy can't do that. Oh, this I really love. Oh, I can feel myself lean into it. I can feel myself become more expansive and it starts to become so loud that it is really hard to ignore. And that's a beautiful thing because it means we're, becoming really deeply connected with ourselves again. But
Yeah.
buyer
Yeah,
beware.
that's amazing.
You're going to go
I
down the road.
actually I did a podcast interview with Jeanette Firo, who's part of Avalon Spirit with You, and we talked a lot about the body as well and this trinity, but what that meant. And so this layer of talking with you about the body and then just doing that experience with you, it's so simple and yet so profound. It's so, I mean, for me, I was I was just floored at how simple it was and just the outcome and how it's such a good reminder to just check in. And because it's so simple and so impactful, it's easier. Like you said, it just becomes ingrained that you're going to check in. What is this? What is this feeling? What's going on here?
Yeah. Yeah. I like to tell people it's simple, but it's not always easy,
Yeah.
especially
Oh,
at the,
yeah.
especially at the beginning, because it's, when I'm introducing certain tools to people, or, they'll be like, we're doing what? And full disclosure, when I was learning them, I'm like, you want me to look around the room?
Yeah.
Okay, well, whatever. And but with time, I started to realize, oh, these things done with intention, done with slowness, done with the nervous system in mind, and from a trauma lens, and all of these aspects, it does make subtle and profound shifts in our ability to navigate life and its hardships. And there's, when I'm working with people, because I'll work with people one off, but also in longer term like packages, especially if there's like kind of bigger things that we want to work towards or whatever. And there's always this point where, and I trust it more now, but especially at the beginning, but I see it with, I would say, almost every person, where at the beginning it feels really slow, and I can tell, and I always give the disclaimer of like, it's going to feel like we're not really doing much at the beginning.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if you can just kind of trust the process and know that I'm still tracking that, but it feels like nothing's really changing. And then all of a sudden something happens and they're like, oh my God, like the way that I responded to that was so different, or something clicked into place where I could feel this difference in my energy, or this thing happened and things shift. And it's like, it all kind of becomes this tipping point where all of a sudden they're like, oh my gosh, it works. And I think that's where it's not easy, because somatic work inherently, when it's working with the nervous system, it has to be slow. So, even in the work that you and I did together, there was a point in time where a part of your system was like, whoop, I don't like that. I don't want to be seen. I don't want to. And so we move away from that. We
Yeah.
honor what the body is saying. That's too much. I don't want to go
Yeah.
there. Okay, let's back away and let it. That inherently is working with it, but also creating a safety within our system of like, oh, okay, I don't have to like dive right into all my pain and trauma and the worst things. I can work with things in a gentle way, and it doesn't have to feel so bad. It doesn't have to hurt. It doesn't have to be these, ripping the scab off the wound, so to
Yeah.
speak. It's like
Well, that's
gentle.
what I really enjoyed with our work is that you brought me back and forth. It was like into the fear. Oh, let's give that fear some space and let's go back into this other memory. So maybe I can tell people what that looked like, and you can jump in, because it was just, like I said, it was so impactful. And the amount of judgment that we realized that we're loading on ourselves is just so unnecessary. So, when Elyse is getting me to look around the room, I'm looking around, I'm looking at like the ceiling. I'm just like, oh man, I really need to fill in those cracks. And that paint looks bad. And oh, there's like some cobwebs, and Miss Judgy Judgerson. But I'm getting into the process. I'm like, slowing things down. And then we start getting into then the next step was the fear and the, no, I think you asked me to look at a really good memory, or what did we do after that? I can't remember.
Yeah. So with yours specifically, we were talking about, like fear and what would happen if this thing didn't go well, or
Yeah.
and so we oriented towards, okay, when's a time that you felt really accomplished, that you felt really like confident and proud in yourself? And what was interesting is two memories came up, and this is where I really love body, like somatic work, because two things came up: one memory that you use quite frequently and one that you don't. And we said, okay, let's check in with your body. What feels like is coming forward more? And you said the one that you don't use as often.
Yeah.
And
And that I don't think that I've ever really used in this kind of work. And to put in context, I've done some like I've done quite a lot of inner child work. And so you would thought that this memory would have come up. So I was doing an interview the following day with Dr. Evan Alexander. He's been interviewed by Oprah, Larry King, been invited by the Dalai Lama to do a presentation with him. I was kind of freaking out. And so that, funnily enough, that memory of me trekking in the Himalayas, that one hasn't come up as a well done me kind of thing. But it turned out that was I was very proud of that memory. And so that podcast, I released that podcast last week. And so if you're listening to this one, go back the week before and you'll find it. And so then we'd established that as this really brave moment in my life. And granted, it was 20 years ago, but it still did the trick.
Yeah. And what I loved about it is it wasn't necessarily what the brain wanted. And that's a lot of the work that I do as the person supporting someone and leading this, is that we're often constantly being like, okay, back into the body, because the brain's like, but wait, let me tell you all these things that I think in this story that I have, and and it's like, nope, we're not working with you today. That's where we live. That's where a lot of us default to when we're doing, work to support ourselves, is like the brain and telling it's telling its stories and running from survival, basically.
Yeah.
And so it was like, no, let's reorient to the body. The body is leading with that memory. And what was really cool about it is that there were so many interesting parallels that I'm sure your brain wouldn't have picked up on. And parallels from that experience to the experience of fear and nervousness that we were working with. And these pieces that came up that paralleled it so specifically that it was like you could kind of bounce back and forth between all different aspects of both of those experiences. Your intuition leading you, all of these different pieces. And then it opened the door to other things and other pieces that your body was like, oh, right, there's also this.
Yeah.
And it didn't want to do that until we had given it some space, had been gentle with it. And then it was like, oh, okay, now I trust you. We can go to this other stuff.
And so my fear, when I thought of the fear, I'd felt like, Elyse was walking me through, how does this feel like in your body with, about to do this interview and stuff. And I was feeling, pressure in various spots. And then I could feel, this pressure in my head and pressure in my chest, and decided not to go with that feeling of pressure in my chest. We focused on the pressure in my head. And in my mind's eye, I saw it looked like an obscurial from the Harry Potter series, Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them. If anyone's seen that movie, looked like an obscurial in my head. And it's sitting there. And eventually, that fear turned into my 6-year-old self. And when we were looking at it, like Elyse said, it was like, oh, no, I don't want you to look at me. And it was just this funny experience with who's that talking? But I just thought, I'm just going to go with the first thing that comes into my head. And that was, nope, I don't want to look. And so then, like Elyse said, you guided me back. And that was truly amazing. And you talked about really that balance is the ticket.
Yeah. It's not, the definition of, well, there's different definitions, but one of the common definitions that you hear about trauma is too much, too fast, too soon. And so, we weren't working with like big, massive, like traumas in your life, but there can still be these small t things that it felt like it was, that was really hard, or that was too much, or I didn't have the skills or the resources or the support to process this thing. And so it was living in my body. And we don't want to work with those things in a way that's too much, too fast, too soon.
Yeah.
So as soon as there's a resistance that's coming up, we're not like, no, get in there. We're stepping back. Okay, we hear your signs and signals. And so it's this twofold benefit of allowing that specific thing that we're working with to process. And that's great. And we're also reconfiguring our experience within our body and our minds to say, I'm listening to you. I'm going to honor what you need. I'm not going to push. I'm not going to, make you go somewhere that doesn't feel good to go. We're going to go back to a place that has safety, that has resourcing, that feels grounded. And we move in between those two things. And that's where the benefit, we can do these things, especially as we get skilled with it on our own, but there's also benefit because your nervous system is reading my nervous system, even through Zoom, to say, oh, also she's okay. So I can pick up on that oscillation. If she's calm, I can be calm too. And we can start to move closer to things in a way that feels calm. And this goes back to what I was, venting about self-sabotage is, let's say you're, this fear that was living in you got the better of you and you're like, I can't do this. I'm canceling the interview. What the common rhetoric would be, well, you self-sabotaged yourself. You got in your own way. And okay, fine, you did. But now where we know that was coming from, that was a young part of self being like, I'm afraid because of X, Y, and Z. And this specific experience really poked at that for a number of different reasons. And it couldn't remember all of the other experiences where you had success, where you had, persevered, where you could be proud and you did the scary thing, trekking in the Himalaya, like is what, right? That's a wild experience. But in that moment, that young part of self was like, I don't know anything about that. Well, this is scary and we don't want to go there and we're going to cancel. And so it goes back to that, like, it's a part of you protecting yourself from a perceived threat, not necessarily a real threat, but a perceived one.
And I think so many of us push, and because that's what brought us success in the past. And so much of my inner dialogue was, if I'm not successful, I am not trying hard enough. And let's just like discount everything that my body is feeling, my mind is feeling, and we are going to push through, and we are going to, like, come hell or high water, we are going to get there and do the thing. And I nibbled quite frequently on the type A personality, or was in it, in my attempts to prove my worthiness and my enoughness and things like that. And then we talk about leaving that 6-year-old self on the road way back, or your 8-year-old self, or your 4-year-old self, and exercises like this help you go and collect them, and you bring your adult self to that child that you were, and you do the thing together. And so, because they're often the fear that's driving the bus. And it's so amazing to see how especially apparent that is in so many women's journeys. And and so this memory that I had was, I'd climbed up to 5,400 meters, 18,000 feet. I'd been through all the stuff to get there, the food poisoning, the altitude sickness, many, many leeches in my socks, and, very tired. And I did it, and I got up to the top, and then I was sitting in this really, like, it was just the best hut I'd ever been in. I mean, put that thing at sea level and it's not going to be that way at all. It probably was a bit of a dump, but for me, it was just heaven on earth to be in this hut and have a woman had bought me a milk tea and a Mars bar, and it was just such a wonderful memory. And it was my 30th birthday. So going back to this memory and showing my little girl self who was fearful was just amazing, that that showing your little person that, look at the stuff that we've done. And then that allowed me to then look at the fear even more. It empowered that 6-year-old to be like, okay, well, maybe you can look. And it might sound crazy to anyone who's listening, but I would ask, just suspend any of that thinking that this is too weird or whatever, and open your mind to the possibility that this could be very freeing and very helpful. So that next morning, I had the interview, and I was practicing. I was reliving the scenes that, Elyse helped bring up for me. And I was just in that really calm place. And I had this feeling when we first started chatting. I'd read in his books that he liked to make sure the audience was connected with him. And he was trying to, lead from his heart space, which is not something that I had expected to read out of a neurosurgeon. However, having had a near-death experience, he's more open to a lot of things. And so I thought, why don't I invite him into that Himalayas scene to get us started? And so I'd asked him to picture that going up that mountain and being in that really cozy hut and having milk tea and having just a delicious conversation. And it all felt so good. And so then I was just able to be in that really good space. And if you had just told me about it, I'd have been like,
I will not be doing that.
But the fact that it happened and the divine timing of it all was the day before. And this kind of guy, a guy like he's, I don't know, is he in his 60s now, I think? And analytical male, very professional guy. I would have wanted to bring my A-type personality to that talk. And that would have been the wrong personality to bring. I needed to bring the just me. And so, yeah, I think it was a really awesome conversation. And it was because I got to get in touch with my nervous system and do that work. So if anyone has an interview or anything coming up, call Elyse.
Yeah. And, I love that you did that. And again, it comes back to so many people when I do readings with folks, are like, how do I, and it comes up in, the somatic coaching and whatnot too, but it's like, how do I be more connected with my intuition? How do I trust these things that I know? And some people can feel like, oh, that's like woo woo, airy fairy. But it's also like we all have those experiences, regardless of whether you count yourself as a spiritual person or not, where you just know something. You're just like, I need to go talk to that person. I need to go do that thing. I need to go left instead of right. And it happens, right? And you even spoke to, there was an intuitive piece in your Himalayas experience of like, you climbed a little bit further than everybody else said because, and everyone else was like, oh, you shouldn't do that. And you're like, no, I know I need to do it. And that was a big part of getting you to the top and the finish line when maybe other people didn't get that because of, X, Y, and Z. Whether you want to have it be a spiritual thing or, just that gut feeling that you have, to me, it's potato. It's living within our body, right? From a spirit perspective, it's our spirit is driving the bus of our body. So our mind has its experience, our body has its wisdom, and then our spirit has its experience. And they're all living together in the same, body that's here on this earth. When we talk about, the non-spiritual gut feeling, we talk about it, it's in my gut. I can feel it in my gut. We reference the body. The body is the way through to those experiences. So a lot of times people who are, if I'm assuming when you were hiking up the mountain, you're very in your body. You're very aware of like, this is how I'm feeling. I need to eat. I need to rest. I'm thirsty. I'm like, you have to be in tune with yourself in order to succeed in something like that.
Yeah.
Which I believe gives you access to that intuition, that gut feeling in a different way than when we're living in a very mental, highly stressed, overactive, sympathetic nervous system. We're in fight, flight, freeze a lot of the time. It's kind of cutting us off from all of the wisdom that's living within our spirit and through our body. And so my belief is that through the body is the way to develop our intuition. And that when we have those gut feels of like, okay, I'm going to lead him through like a meditation visualization, essentially, the brain's going to go, no, you're not. That's stupid. Don't do that. But when you're connected and embodied, it's like, no, that feels like the right thing to do. And we just can follow it with more ease. So for a lot of people, when they're like, how do I connect more with that intentionally? A big piece of that is reconnection with the body and learning how to trust those nudges that you get, because usually they feel like they're coming from the body, and sometimes they are, and sometimes they're coming from the spirit within. But it's a gateway in that I think gets missed a lot. And we kind of cut it off because the brain is so powerful and it has all sorts of
Yeah.
things to say all the time.
Right.
Mm.
Yeah. This nonstop chatter.
Mm-hmm.
That's where going in and just practicing that, being that calm and just checking in with yourself is helpful to turn off that chatter. And I think about the how it can be confusing of going after your dreams and chasing your dreams, and the fine line between pushing too hard or, accomplishing your goal and things. And I think of, climbing up that mountain. It was one foot in front of the other, and I probably counted sets of 20 steps for probably like hours and hours. And so I can be very stubborn or very determined, whatever the nice version of that is that you want to say. And so I think it's just it's a fine line between when you're overdoing it for your body and when you know that this is fine. You've prepared for this. You're ready. You're not giving yourself an irreversible injury. You are not going to well, you can't get airlifted at 5,400 meters. But when you get down to 3,000 meters, you're not going to get airlifted. You're taking the responsible steps to be able to perform the way you need in these high intensity situations. And you can have an opposite is true of just pushing yourself for other reasons, like this boyfriend who wants me to bike to the top of this mountain, and I've got a vein popping out of my leg, and I keep going. That's when you're like, if you tuned into your body, you would say, screw the boyfriend, I'm going to take care of my leg. But if you tune into your mind and that fear factor, you may listen to the boyfriend, which I did. We eventually broke up.
Yeah, fair. I get that. And for me, again, kind of coming full circle to how for me I got here was, very similar. I spent my life punishing my body, punishing myself for not being this or not being that, or I'm not smart enough, or I'm not this enough, or whatever. And it all just kind of like built and built and built. And I was so, I was teaching yoga and I was lifting all the weights. And, I used to force myself to work out in the morning, which a lot of people love. And that's great for their bodies and cool, great. I'm not pooping on that. For me, it was just like, if I don't do this, then I'm not succeeding in the day and I'm not da-da-da. And, we know that trauma and stress can trigger health things that come up, right? There's a book by Gabor Mate, The Body Keeps the Score. And, for me, it was like I was this able-bodied person and I was strong and it became my identity, what I can do and how I can push myself and how I can show up and what this means about me. And then I experienced endometriosis, like extreme endometriosis, chronic pain, and like just kind of a snowballing of things from really a lifetime of punishing and ignoring my body and the things that it was trying to say all along.
Right.
That eventually became, when my dad passed away, I think that was like the tipping point that my system just couldn't handle any more things. And then it was like, oh, endometriosis. Oh, and this. Oh, and this. Oh, and this. And it just kind of turned into this whole thing where, I've often spoke on Spirit Coffee Talk about, for me, I have so much compassion for people with chronic health issues and have lived in it. And, still navigating pieces of it. It can be one of the most like soul opening, dark night of the soul. Like you can go to the core of yourself. And I had to reevaluate what is success for in my business? What does it mean to have to like live in a way that maybe other people think like, what are you doing? Or why are you doing that? How I have to change the way in which I live my life and honor that when I feel good, I'm like, okay, great, I can do all these things, but don't do too much because your body will be very angry at you if you do too much. So, for me, chronic illness and what has transpired since endometriosis and then other diagnoses that have come up is the way in which my body is able to heal in many ways, the way in which it needs way more support to do that from a number of different modalities. And the basis of that being, if I ignore it and I ignore the stress and I ignore the trauma and I ignore the pieces that are like building the building blocks for a lot of this, not all of it, but a lot of it, I'm only going to suffer more. And so it's been such a radical shift in how I've had to live my life in the last couple of years and honor the way in which on any given day my body wants to show up in the world. And some days she's energetic and she's lively and she feels strong and we do all the things and we live, this full, fit, healthy, active life. And then other times she's like, no, we're going to have a very much rest day. And you're going to, as much as you want to go outside and, do this and do that, you need to just rest and maybe do some yoga and be very gentle with yourself. And so that can be a real challenge. It can be a really challenging place to be, but I think it also invites us into the depths of ourselves and so many belief systems that we hold. And it can allow us to really shift towards a deeper alignment within, why we're here and what we're meant to be doing on this planet as individuals and collectively. So it's been an interesting journey, and I continue to do it. But I'll also say that this work in so many ways I've had to shift so that my body has the support that it needs and my nervous system has the support that it needs to feel healthy and well. And the energies and the, medicines of all shapes and sizes, energetic and otherwise. And the resilience that I see in my nervous system since undertaking this work is so fascinating. My partner had a stroke very unexpectedly, quite young, back in the fall. And I kept, obviously traumatizing experience, very scary. He's okay. But he was in the hospital for a while. We didn't know if he was going to regain. He had lost complete feeling of his whole entire left side, couldn't walk. Wow. And, it was terrifying. And I kept thinking I was so numb and I was just I'm really good at powering through. I'm really good at the resource and then get the things done and show up for the people and do the things. I'm great in a crisis. And so I was in that zone of fight and pushing forward. And in the back of my mind, I'm like, my body's going to crash. I'm going to crash. I'm just waiting for the crash to come because I was overriding everything, wasn't sleeping, all the things. But as I shifted out of a handful of days, we kind of started to get more information about him. Okay, things are looking better. This is what we think is going to happen. I was able to turn to my tools and really support myself in the feelings of holy shit, that was a lot. And that was really overwhelming. And I supported myself through that. And I had my, the people around me supporting me through that. And I was able to ask for what I need. And that crash never came. And part of my brain was but is it gonna? When is it gonna come? And then I eventually spoke with my somatic practitioner and in saying I really felt the difference in the resilience of my nervous system. Yeah, I was completely overwhelmed and exhausted and pushing for, 5 days from the day of the stroke until for 5 days until I felt like I could breathe. But then it was my body remembered, okay, we know what to do with this.
Right.
We know how to move through it. And it doesn't have to lead to your body and your mind, your spirit completely falling apart now. And not only are you having to caregive for this person that you care about and love, but you're also trying to pick yourself up off the floor.
Right.
That didn't have to happen. And so it's a great reminder for me and, for the people who are undertaking this work of it doesn't necessarily mean when we do this, life's going to get easier. Or, all of a sudden we may wave a magic wand and no hardship comes to us, but it's that our mind and our body and our spirits know what they're actually capable of and that they can hold us through these things. We just have to relearn to allow them to do that and engage with them in a way that's actually going to open space for that.
Yeah. And it sounds like you just cleared so much capacity in your nervous system. It's all that work just calmed everything down. So it could handle the bumps of your life.
Yeah.
Which is awesome.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, that's so great. I know I could talk to you all day.
I know.
And I think we need to wrap up. And I was wondering if you had any kind of final words of wisdom you'd like to share with our listeners.
I think I would say that we live in a world, like we've talked about pushing and doing all the things. And I think healing can feel like that too, right? There's endless self-help books. There's
Yeah.
endless things that we can, heal and do. And for me, somatic work, I love it because yes, it's healing, but it can also be in a way that is slow, that is gentle, and it doesn't have to feel so overwhelming. At minimum, maybe you're not digging back into all of the hardships, but you're just learning how to be in the present and be with your body and experience the here and now differently. Um, and one of the beautiful underpinnings of somatic work is that you are whole, you are complete, and your body knows what to do. Your spirit knows what to do. Your mind does know what to do. It's just about kind of clearing the cobwebs. So you're not broken. You don't have to feel like you have to endlessly heal everything that's wrong with you and your blocks and all these things. Um, you actually have all of that within you. It's just learning to allow your system to do what it needs to do, what it intuitively knows to do. Um, and so, yeah, I would just say if it feels like, oh, great, another healing modality, that's fair. It doesn't have to be, healing doesn't have to be so much work. Again, it's simple. It's not always easy. And it's just about relearning what you already know.
Yeah, that's great. I love that. And I think it can get overwhelming. And sometimes, there's this feeling of, am I ever going to get off this healing journey? And so that's a really great, those are really great words of wisdom, Elyse. Thank you so much for being on the podcast. I really loved our chat. And if anyone wants to get a hold of you, I'll put your contact details in the show notes. And thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Miles to Zen. If you enjoyed this podcast, please share with a friend, like, subscribe, follow, and please join me every week for a new podcast. Have a fabulous week and talk to you soon.